Firstly, adanya milpangalili jaga miragodi map na anerna kada ditna man nonna worka pinji nuna kada large people na iman kenya de nyan yaral per mangamal mapan. I'll just translate that into English. So we're standing on a Laraki land. I acknowledge the traditional owners where we're standing on, past, present, and emerging. We're a group of people that are a partnership with University of Queensland, CSIRO team. So the first slide. So this is the investigation of thermal comfort and prepaid energy insecurity on the TAN campus. Alice Springs, which was initiated by TAN campus. So when we began this research, it wasn't initiated by somebody else. It was from the TAN campus themselves, putting their hand up and saying there's a big problem with all the energy insecurity in the TAN camps and how they suffer from all the problems in the TAN camps. In the summer of 2018 and 2019 was really, really hot. Barnda was that hot that the 59 days over 40 degrees Celsius we had for 59 days over 40 plus and 129 days over 35 degrees Celsius. So during that time, our air conditioner, swampy air cons wasn't working. We had fans. We had hot houses that was built not to cater for our weather condition in our Central Australia region, but our houses were hot, poorly insulated, poorly shaded, blockwork walls radiated heated, and the swampy air conditioner was struggling to keep the cool during those hot summer, even the summer we just passed not long ago, it was about over 40 degrees, 45 degrees. So as we know that during that time, people talk about houses, and I just like to go back a bit saying that when I was growing up on a cattle station, we had no air conditioning, no fan, but the temperature at that time wasn't extremely hot as it is now. I'm also partnering doing some research work with Regional Power about the new prepaid meters. So before the prepaid meters came along, we had normal bills, quarterly bills, and that was extremely high. Plus, but we had some centre pay deduction to cater for the bills if you were struggling. But that didn't work. That got taken out, and then I put another one in, and it had a little bar strip in it. And if that strip didn't work, that's when you couldn't even put any power into that prepaid smart meter payment. When they put these prepaid smart meters, we've noticed that we pay an extra tariff for our electricity. And there's a lot of people don't understand, especially our mob on the TAN camp, don't understand that this new prepaid smart meter, it increases tariffs. So we're paying more tariffs than South Australia, Northern Territory, Queensland and WA. And the more prepayment, self-disconnection is happening right now. Like people are getting self-disconnected because they can't afford to keep the power on. The thing is that this prepaid smart meters that family members are given a choice whether to keep the power on or keep the food. So it shouldn't come down to that, like having choices of either way. It should be simple and plain and affordable for people to have power and food in their fridge. So when the power goes off, their food spoils, and then they've got to wait another fortnight for their next pay to do shopping again. So it's really a big struggle for our mob in the town camps. Not all there, but there's a lot of our mob are still struggling to this day. If you got no money, there's no electricity. So either you go out with the power and live during winter and summer. There's no way for you to stay cool at summer and stay warm in the winter. So with this new prepaid smart meters, there's a thing called a friendly credit, and on the weekend it clicks over. Come Monday morning, you're paying extra bills if your power runs out. Say, for instance, for example, there was a lady had a power cut off, and she had the friendly credit put on. Come Monday, she had to pay $180 to cover the debt and the friendly credit. So, according to government, they think it's a smart prepaid meters, but it's not very smart at all.
We've rehearsed this several times, so we're a really well-oiled machine here. So we might imagine that I'll be skipping through some of these. So, I mean, obviously, we're not going to sort of cover off on prepayment meters the whole time, because really what we're sort of interested in is two things in a way. We were going to do two 15-minute presentations, but we've merged into sort of 1.5 hour presentation. So the rollout of the smart meters had a significant impact on the Alice Springs town camps, and also in urban public housing in Alice Springs. So the Liberty 120 smart meters were first rolled out. It was like an experiment, really. Prior to that, there was token readers or card readers, and someone overseas stopped manufacturing them. So we ended up with these Liberty 120 smart meters. And the first place they were rolled out, in fact, was the Alice Springs town camp. So it felt like a bit of an unfortunate, almost like an experiment in a way, unfortunately. And certain things sort of come into play, self-disconnections, which is basically when the language even is a bit I suppose, I didn't actually introduce myself, so Michael Klerck from Aboriginal Housing NT. This is what happens when you're having an unfacilitated panel session. So Michael Klerck, Aboriginal Housing NT, but I had the good fortune of working for Tungunjira Council for 17 years. So I went from being quite a young man to a much older man in that time. But I, had the pleasure of working closely with Vanessa Davis doing social policy and research projects. And just kind of recapping this idea, sort of how to bring this all together, was that the issue of self-disconnections and the issue of houses not performing very well, this wasn't, this was something that our members, so town campers, were bringing to us. And unfortunately, when residents talk about an issue, government doesn't necessarily listen. So that's when you start looking for partnerships with the likes of CSIRO to try and bring some numbers to the table. Start talking in the language that people will listen to. But there's a few things about this story, I think, before we get into the guts of it. Self-disconnections, it's not really self-disconnections because people aren't choosing to actually disconnect from power. That's something that happens when there's no credit on the meter. And then I've talked about here, there's an acronym here, which is NIMI, which is National Meter Indicator and Meter Numbers. And the reason why I want to talk about that very briefly is that consumers are invisible. So, for example, I've got a post-pay account at home. Jakarta knows that I'm Michael Klerck and where I live, but when it comes to prepaid customers, people are known via their national meter indicator number and their meter number. So people are invisible. Vanessa's already sort of mentioned about about friendly credit, but self-disconnection is an interruption of the supply of electricity because the prepayment meter has no credit. So that's no money on the meter. That's fairly self-explanatory. This is basically this map here, just very briefly. It's showing where sort of prepay is used, and it's predominantly in places like remote Northern Territory, but also Northern Territory towns, remote parts of WA, and remote parts of South Australia, and to an extent in Queensland as well. So it's overwhelmingly remote communities and town camps, but also urban public housing in the NT. This little diagram sort of talks about friendly credit, which we've talked about already. So friendly credit is kind of an involuntary type of credit. The power won't disconnect outside of business hours, but then there's a debt that needs to be paid before people can reconnect. So quite often the frequency of disconnections on Monday mornings at the end of the weekend is very high. And if there's a public holiday on a Monday, then it's the Tuesday. And if the 4G network goes down, which it can do, it won't disconnect for 10 days, and then there's quite a big debt that people have to pay before they can go back on.
Sorry, can I just touch on this? On the map there, it says where the dots are. I've partnered with the regional power, and we've done research in South Australia, in the top of WA, Queensland, and NT. And the thing about South Australia, they just pay less tariff than we do, and they are entitled, every household in South Australia is entitled for a concession card. But whereas in NT, we have to, people that try to apply for NT concession card to help them with the power, they have to go through all these hoops. And then when they actually, even though the residents in South Australia are under 50, but a household boss tenant, they are still entitled for a concession card, whereas NT struggles to people to apply for concession card to help them out with these power. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm watching the time because I don't want to cut Ray short. This is a spot the difference, basically. You know, like I've actually made the mistake of using the same picture twice, so you won't spot any differences. But if I didn't, this one's pay as you go, so that's a prepayment. This one over here would look exactly the same, but it wouldn't say PAYG. So essentially, we're talking about some of the things that are impacting prepaid customers. They're not technological, they're policy, poor policy. And this is just kind of reinforcing the point, name or number. So if someone wants to top up their prepay account, they can either go into the shop or they can go online if they've got, you know, decent internet and they've got a credit card and all these things. And the other thing that they need to know is this number's on the meter itself, so I guess you can read that. This number here is a national meter identifier. No one knows their number. I mean, you've all got one, I guess, if you've got a meter at home. But so the person is invisible. And that's a problem for things like what Vanessa was saying about concession and stuff like that. There's currently exemptions being issued to the energy retailer and remote communities for like not taking sort of proactive hardship measures. But proactive hardship measures, when you see lots of disconnection, should mean that you reach out to people and find out what's going on, maybe let them know about concessions that they're entitled to. You know, very briefly, so Tarrangere back in the day pursued sort of prepaid disconnection data, and we published, we actually published data back in 2021 for the homelessness inquiry, and the argument was homelessness is more than about not having a roof, it's about having adequate housing, and if a house is routinely disconnecting from power, it's not adequate, so that's why we published in that way. But at that time there was, in sort of the regulated network, so towns, there was, you know, just over 2,000 prepayment meters, but there was probably about 5,000 in remote outside the regulated networks. 72% of those prepayment meters were disconnecting. 72, nearly 3/4. And, you know, across the NT, the average meter was disconnecting 34 times per annum, and the average disconnection was 400 minutes. To do the maths on that, like, that's hours. And in some regions, like in Alice Springs, the disconnection rate was as high as 95% of the houses were disconnecting from power, and they were disconnecting 55 times per annum in that first year, so more than once a week, for an average of 7 hours, which is just phenomenal, really. But now I'm handing it over to Ray.
No mic. I'll have his own mic.
No worries.
Thanks. Thanks, Guy. Thanks a lot. Yeah, so we came together a few years ago, and as the team have described, we came on board to, I guess, provide an evidence base for Tarrangere primarily around thermal comfort, like we talked about in the last session, because we wanted to sort of we wanted to know what was happening inside those houses, what was the temperature and humidity. So we had tackled in 2 phases, and I'll briefly talk about the first phase, then talk about the second phase, and then talk a little bit about the data, hopefully in the time we've got left. And Michael and Vanessa, please chip in because we've been on this journey for a few years. So as I did say in the previous session, I live in Brisbane. So the idea of working in Alice Springs was a little bit novel. I hadn't been to Alice Springs before, and made a lot of assumptions, as you do when you're, living in somewhere like Brisbane. But the first thing we needed to do was actually see if we could get the data, right? And so we repurposed devices and tech from another project, and we went out to Alice Springs, landed in Alice Springs in February, I think it was, and it was like 1,000,000 degrees. It was like 45 degrees. And we went and we plugged some of these devices into one of the community centres, and we were getting data coming through like in real time. And inside the community centre, it was almost 45 degrees. And we just couldn't believe it. So, but of course the locals knew very well what was happening. So we went through and we had 20 houses. We put in these devices. We trained up Denise and Vanessa to install routers and all this sort of tech, which was really good. That you guys did all that for us. Thanks. And we're getting data. And Michael and Vanessa and Denise had said all along about the issues with power prepayment meters. And I was a bit, I'm from the big smoke. I know everything. I'm a scientist. I really didn't get it until we started getting the data. And there were these big gaps in the data. And because we put in devices that relied on routers that were plugged into the wall, whenever the power went off, we couldn't get our data. And so we had these gaps. But the reason we did the first phase was to see if we could actually get data, work with community, and come up with some results, which we did. And over comprehensively, and there's a QR code to the report on there, but you can see through this sample, it's only a sample of a few houses, that the houses weren't performing up to standard around thermal comfort. And in fact, they were replicating very close to the external temperature compared to BOM data. But it was a small sample size. So we came back and, of course, the power insecurity came up. So we came back and we've just completed data collection for phase 2. And we've gone to a whole new system where we had to set up our own Internet of Things, or IoT, so that we could have these battery-powered devices sitting in the houses, and the circles show the actual networks we set up. So we could collect the data. This can just go around. And, being the experts, we were like, yeah, just stick them on with two-sided tape. It'll work. And Carlo from Tangentyere Construction's like sitting in the meeting, shaking his head. Sure enough, within a week, he had to go around and bolt them all.
He said, use a screw. And we, of course, went, no, it'll be right. It'll be fine. It takes a lot longer. When you're in a rush to do something, you do something the wrong way. It takes a lot longer ultimately to then go back and do it a second time.
So we did that, but this time we're also incorporating information around the housing structures and those things, and some health data. And we're just collecting that data as we speak, and we'll bring that together, and we'll get the, as I say, I'm just rushing through these things, given that we're pushing for time. But as Michael and Vanessa have talked about the data around prepayment meter data, so we were provided with, in partnership with these guys, data from 123 houses, a 15-minute interval data over 12 months, and we analysed that. And you can see that over the period, you can see where it's had some gaps there. So again, we've got a whole presentation on the data, but this heat map is a really good snapshot to see over those houses. Now, the navy blue is where there was no power, and it sort of changes colour. So every house at some stage during those 12 months had periods without power, right? 123 houses. Pretty good snapshot, pretty good sample size. And in summary, with the data from that sample size, we found that 100% of the houses experienced a disconnection over the 12 months. And 72 days per year for 5.16 hours is the average for the houses. So if you're an average punter living in Alice Springs Town Camp, you can expect to have 72 days of the year while you're having at least 5 hours without power, which is hard to believe in this day and age.
And it sort of varies throughout the year, as you can kind of imagine, like, you know, in periods of really cold winters, like, you know, June, say, for example, where people are running fan heaters and the like, disconnection rates will increase. But also one thing that Ray didn't mention, that the cohort of houses the second time round with the data loggers, there was 15 of these legacy houses from prior to the, you know, the subleasing arrangements prior to the intervention, 15 houses that were, you know, CSIRO era houses, so sort of middle-age houses, and 15 home build era houses. It would be really interesting to see how those three eras of houses step up, how they compare.
Yeah, so with the data, we'll be able to demonstrate in the next analysis when the houses lost power, what was actually happening with the temperature at the same time, which we couldn't collect in the first round.
So as a researcher, I suggested that Ray and Mike, that we try all these different houses, like CSIRO and other houses, to compare which is more better to monitor the temperature inside the house compared to the new and old one. That's why we suggested to look around at those three houses. So that's what I'm doing now.
Yeah, and the engagement and the households' willingness to participate in the study has been outstanding, and we're doing, you know, surveying them as well to get some qualitative information around their experiences. And just another thing, like working with other scientists, when we're sort of planning this out, other scientists were like, okay, so you need to put a device in each room to monitor the difference between the rooms and all these sort of things. And the reality is the purpose of the study is to provide evidence around the house, the performance of the house. We don't need data from every single room. I mean, that would be great. It'd tell us a lot more depth, but it's not going to answer, you know, it's a lot of work to over-answer the question, you know? So we just have to be careful around not over-engineering things. And we were talking about that before, about what are some simple fixes to get solutions to some of the big problems. There is a device going around. I need to take that back. I won't tell you how much they're worth, but
So the Alice Springs town camps are part of the Alice Springs kind of grid. So they're grid connected, as opposed to, like, so the retailers, Jacana Energy, the distributors, Power and Water. So it's a bit different to the remote communities that are, you know, Indigenous essential services. But this will be a really good opportunity. This piece of work will be a good opportunity. So the consumption data was looked at for those 120 houses, and so the consumption in a lot of those houses is quite high, particularly in the winter time when it's cold and people are using a lot of heating equipment. But the tariff, the thing about the prepayment smart meters is the tariff can be adjusted remotely. So back in the day when it was token readers, someone had to physically go out and adjust the tariff. So when those smart meters went in 2018-19, like, the tariffs did go up by a margin.